Today's webinar, we're going to be featuring IEC 61508 and really highlighting how it is practical and very important for every device, and even especially those mechanical devices. I see a few new people on, so welcome. Thanks for joining us. If you don't know me yet, my name's Lauren Stewart. I'm a CFSE here, and I work here at Exida, and I work a lot with our mechanical customers. So I work with our valves and actuator and solenoid customers, helping them reach the IEC 61508 certification. So this is one of my favorite topics. I also help Exida do a lot of our trainings and teachings. In case you are unfamiliar with Exida, we are involved the whole way through anything to do with functional safety in multiple different industries. So whether you're in the very beginning of the process, building equipment that needs to be certified, building those devices, being an OEM, we have tools, we have consulting, we have services, we can help you get certified, all the way through to if you are end users that need to use those certified products, we have tools, software, consultants, we can help do your calculations, all of that. So we help you the whole way through, whether it's in functional safety, alarm management, cybersecurity, any of your reliability needs, we can help you along the way with. Exida is worldwide. I like to say, no matter where you are, where your customers are, where your end users are, where your devices are coming from, we have people that are close by to help. So we have experts all over the world in functional safety and alarm management and cybersecurity. And this isn't even our most up-to-date map, which is exciting because we're growing quickly. Exida has a ton of reference material, and I always let all of my customers know that we have free white papers, free webinars, free blogs. We have books published, we have our software, everything that we are researching, all our processes, our procedures, it's all published, whether it's online or in a book somewhere. We figure if we're finding out the most up-to-date knowledge on how to be safest, we really should be getting that information out in the marketplace. Today, we're going to briefly talk about certification and IEC 61508 certification especially, but certification is one of the areas that Exida really excels in. And as you can see, not only just IEC 61508 certification, but we were also just updated that we are the global market leader in Logic Solver's certification, which we are really excited to announce. And we'll talk a little bit about what that certification means in this webinar coming up. But let's dive into the main focus, today's webinar. We're going to really talk about and focus in on mechanical customers. So if you're doing valves, actuators, solenoids, whatever your focus is, that is going to be our tailor for today. We're going to look at IEC 61508 and say what it says about mechanical devices and simple mechanical devices without diagnostics, how we can apply the methods of IEC 61508 and the standard to these devices in ways such as an FMEDA. We'll explain all of this coming up. We'll talk about why failure rates and good and realistic failure rates are very, very important, but especially why they're important in final elements in our mechanical devices. And so let's go ahead and get started. Oh, before I start into what we're really here about, If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to write them in the Panels tab. I'm not the best at looking up at the Panels tab and seeing if there's anything written there, but I will always take time at the end and answer whatever questions you may have. So write them in throughout the webinar, and I'll make sure to spend some time at the end to answer any questions you may have. Now let's get started. So IEC 61508 and IEC 61511 their whole standards are based around functional safety. And functional safety can mean a lot of different things to different people, but the main goal of the standard is to have some type of automatic safety function and have it either perform its job correctly in the intended format and function, or that system will fail in a safe or a predictable manner. IEC 61508 came about when working groups and national bodies, governmental standards from all over the world got together, and they wanted to create one document, one standard that had all of the functional safety needs in it together, instead of having each country follow their own practices, or even each different piece of information coming from a different standard. So people from all over came together to have that one goal in mind, to publish functional safety standards from both the view of the OEM who makes the equipment, which would be IEC 61508, and also in the eyes of the end users who use those certified products. And we'll talk about that standard in a little bit, IEC 61511. But IEC 61508 really applies to those automatic protection systems. They have to deal with either working correctly, or if they are to break in a safe or a predictable manner. It's set up for EEPE systems, and we'll talk about that. Even though it's still for mechanical devices as well. And the standard is focuses on the topic of implementing a functional safety life cycle. And if you follow that functional safety life cycle, you will help protect against systematic design failures. It also provides measures against protecting against those random hardware failures through an FMEDA process, which we'll focus on a little bit later as well. The great thing about IEC 61508, it can be applied to historical products, it can be applied to brand new designs, it can be applied to both project and product level work. So it can be completely custom, one-off design, or it can be an off-the-shelf product that just gets sold a lot. The way the standard is written, it can be applied in a number of different ways. Unlike most of the standards written, IEC 61508, instead of being a prescriptive standard, instead of telling you you have to do A, B, C, D in that order, IEC 61508 gives you your main goal, that goal of functional safety, for that automatic protection system to either work correctly or fail safely. And it's really up to you how you apply IEC 61508 for your business. So it gives you a little bit of flexibility depending on which industry you're in. IEC 61508 is kind of known as that umbrella standard, or the grandfather standard. It's the base standard for all industries. I said it's mostly targeted towards suppliers, or those OEMs that are building devices and need to know how to certify their products. Underneath IEC 61508 becomes more specific standards, something for nuclear or machinery, automotive, rail. All of those have individual or substandards, including the process industry. That would be IEC 61511. That standard really relates well with 61508. They're kind of sister standards, where IEC 61508 is in the OEM language, the supplier language, where 61511 talks as if it's an end user language. It's saying how to take those products, how to apply them in safe ways, how to put them together and make safe systems. IEC 61508, it's broken up into 7 main sections. The first 4 parts give the rules, the regulations, everything that they expect, the calculations, and then the last 3 are more guidelines, kind of examples in how to use the requirements in the standards. It is written in EEPE language, standing for electronic, electrical, or programmable electronic products. However, that does not mean that it is not for mechanical products as well. And I'll get into that just a little bit later, more in detail. IEC 61508, it started as really a non-governmental industry standard, and it's growing and growing as the years go on, as more, and sadly, as more accidents are happening. Currently, its level of use and its application is so prevalent, especially in process industry, that it can be considered almost dangerous for an organization to really ignore the standards recommendations. As most societies become more risk averse, and especially if you're living in the United States, you're living in the land of litigation. Complying with IEC 61508 is becoming all but mandatory in most part of the industrialized world. It might not be cited specifically by law. However, if you do have an accident, and that should not be if, it's more and more happening when an accident does occur. If it does get pulled into civil litigation, well, any litigation, but especially civil litigation, it is commonly asked, well, IEC 61508 was known as best engineering practices. Especially if you're using OSHA, if you're doing RAG or GAP, they're going to say, why aren't you knew about this, other engineers knew about the standard, these rules, these regulations, why didn't you? And if it's me, I don't want to be up on that court stand defending why I chose not to comply with standards. As I said earlier, EEPE is based on the electronic, electrical, and programmable electronic. Therefore, we have people asking us all the time, well, I'm just making a ball valve. I don't have any programmable electronics on my simple floating ball valve. Therefore, I don't need to follow the rules of the standard, right? Well, I tell everybody that asks me, well, what's the first thing I do when I have a question? I Googled it. So I simply typed in IEC 61508 and mechanical elements. And the first page that comes up is IEC's website, and a link to the frequently asked questions, their FAQ page. And number 4 was all about it. And I know you can't read this, so I'm going to zoom in. Number 4 directly asks how you can apply IEC 61508 if you don't have everything in a programmable electronic. And it simply lets you know that yes, there's going to be things that don't apply, such as coding and how you're doing your code standards and all of that. It's not going to apply to a ball valve. However, there still will be many requirements that do, and you need to meet the requirements that you still do apply to. So how can I analyze a device like a simple mechanical device that doesn't have the electronics, that doesn't have those programmable electronics, that don't necessarily have a high level of self-diagnostics? Well, we do two different methods to analyze a device. We analyze it through the safety case, which is breaking down the rules and requirements from the standard. As I just said, we'll go through whatever rules and requirements do apply to your simple mechanical device, whether it's a solenoid, actuator, valve. We will make sure you still apply with the documentation to back that all up. On the other hand, you also still need to do an FMEDA. Your FMEDA will give you your random hardware failure, those random failure rates that are super important to your end user customers. An FMEDA or FMEDA is a failure mode effects and diagnostic analysis, and it's really a prediction on failure rates for a specific device. And that's not just a manufacturer. No, it's a make, model, the whole way as specific to environment and application. And we look at any way we can possibly break it, given any stresses involved in the application and the environment compared to the design strength. So when we use that technique, we first ask our customers to send in a drawing, whether it's an exploded view or a cutaway, something that we can really see how it works, and a list of all of the bill of material. We're going to list the application, if it's going to be clean service, severe service, open on trip, close on trip, tight shut off, if it's going to be topside, subsea, or in a nice controlled environment and protected. And we use all of that with our component database and figure out how we can break it. So we will go line by line and say, oh, this bolt, it can break or it can loosen. If it breaks, what happens? If it loosens, what happens? What are the effects of that? And go through each line item until we have done the entire product. From that process, we will have a product failure rate, and that will be broken down into both safe and dangerous, detected and undetected. And external leak, no effect, if you need to know that stuff too. Along with product failure modes, diagnostic coverage. We can also predict useful life. We can talk about proof test coverage and partial valve stroke testing, what that will cover. That can all be found from FMEDA. But as you can imagine, this is really a study of the design strength versus whichever stress we can think to apply. So let's take, for example, we have a simple actuator, and we look at the environment, we look at the application, we look at if it's clean or severe, how it's going to be used. And we do that study of the design strength, and we throw every single stress that we can think of at it that will be applicable. The FMEDA method really is a combination of a number of techniques thrown together. It started off with the Military Handbook 217, that part stress method analysis. And then we added FMEA and we added diagnostic analysis. We threw all of those together and we looked at how component failure rates and failure modes are considered along with the diagnostic effectiveness of each. The great thing about a FMEDA, you can look at historical data or you can do the concept of a brand new, newly designed device. because that is that predictive technique. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of historical data. It gives you those failure rates, those failure modes, diagnostic analysis, diagnostic coverage, useful life, post-test coverage. All of that information comes from using the FMEDA technique with a FMEDA database. But as you can imagine, the strength of your FMEDA relies on the strength of your database. So especially make sure you are using, I like to say, an apples to apples comparison with your database. If you are a subsea application, please do not use a telecom database. If you're a chemical company, offshore might not be the best comparison for you. So whatever database you are using, you want to make sure it is wide enough to cover your range. Because if you have the wrong stress factors, the wrong component failure rates, the wrong failure mode distribution, no matter how great your calculations are, no matter how great your software or whatever tool you're doing your FMEDA with is, it's going to give you poor results. My mom always taught me, if you put garbage in, no matter what you do to it, even if you put on the prettiest bow, you're going to get garbage out. So how do you know what you want that database to be? Well, you need to ask if it's calibrated, if it considers both estimated results and predictive results. How did this database come about? Well, I can't speak for others, but I do know how our database was brought about, and I've been helpful in calibrating it, not necessarily bring it about. We started our database in 1999, and we've been continuously changing it, updating it, calibrating it. We look at manufacturers' field data returns. We look at information coming in from SILSTAT, from end users, field data. We look at IREDA. We have chemical companies studies, other industry databases that all go into looking at and breaking apart component databases, or components in our component database. If we are comparing those and we ever see something that's different, we dive in deep. We look to see if there's a problem with the FMEDA, if there's a problem with the failure rates, if there's a problem with the manufacturer, if there is a problem with the field return study, and why. If there are updates, if technology is getting better, if things are getting more reliable, we will always update our component database as needed. So whenever we do update FMEDAs or new FMEDAs, we'll always have the most up-to-date database and component failure rates included. If you ever want to question if something that you were given makes sense or is in the realm of those realistic data, you can always look at silsafedata.com, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit. So you might be thinking, this is all well and great. We understand a FMEDA, we understand failure rates, but why does this really matter? What's the big deal? Both IEC 61508 and 511, so both OEMs and end user standards, say there needs to be failure rates, and it's not good enough just to have failure rates anymore. The new versions of both of the standards upped the strength of their wording and said not only do you have to have failure rates for these calculations, but those failure rates need to be credible, traceable, documented, and justified. So the standards really related what reliability engineers have understood for a long, long time, that you need to have that good data. Once again, that garbage in is garbage out. So for your failure rates and for your FMEDAs, it's not just good enough to have documented or failure rates that are out there. You need to have similar applications, similar operations. It needs to be credible. It needs to be documented and traceable. I like to think of IEC 61511 and 508 kind of as a bridge to safety. And if you follow the things in the standard, if you follow the life cycle, the requirements, all of the calculations, you're going to get to the other side of the bridge relatively safe. However, if you start picking and choosing what you want to comply with and what you want not to comply with, you start losing some of those supports in your bridge. You might not lose a main support, but you lose enough of those little cables, you're going to run into an issue. This is kind of the same when we talk about the effects of bad or unrealistic failure rates or unrealistic data. Unrealistic data, if you just say, well, no, I have failure rates, that's good enough, it might not be realistic or it might not be what I see every day in the field, but these are failure rates that I can use in my calculation, good. What that can do, putting those into calculations, can lead to not enough redundancy, not enough testing. You could really not be achieving the risk reduction that is required through calculations, and that actually could be having you not achieve your safety integrity level. That's a big deal. So what do people think of as bad? Well, if you go to the dictionary, bad just means it's poor. It doesn't do its job. It fails to reach an acceptable standard. But at exida, we take that a little bit further, as bad data is not only bad, but it's unrealistic and often can lead to dangerous designs. So what do we mean by bad data and bad failure rates? Well, it depends on how you use them and what you're looking at as to what risk you could be looking potentially at causing. Take, for example, you say we have very low failure rates in our marketing brochure. We make very high quality stuff. It never ever fails. Look, we're wonderful. What is the risk of using that or publishing that? Well, it might not be that big of a deal if it comes back that your device does actually fail and you have more realistic expectations. You could get a black eye from an exaggerated reputation. However, it's not going to be such a big deal. However, if your customers are using low failure rates in safety reliability calculations, they could be doing the math and see, well, look, the math says I don't need any redundancy. I never need to test. I never need to do proof tests. This is great. What's the risk there? Well, that's a much different scenario we're dealing with. The risk has to deal with, well, what are you protecting? What is your SIF protecting? Why did you need that safety calculations to begin with? Did you have a hazardous process? Do you have a high-risk operation? You were calculating how much risk you needed to remove from a process, an operation, something, in order for it to be acceptable. So if you're using unrealistic numbers in the calculations to find out if it's acceptable or not, you're just fooling yourself. And you have a very high risk of potentially under-designing your system, maybe not enough architecture, maybe you're not proof testing enough, and that could lead to not finding dangerous failures. And if those dangerous failures are just lying undetected, waiting for a hazard to or a demand to happen on your system, it could be potentially extremely dangerous. So what are some companies? What are some people missing? Well, you need to, if you're going to publish data, if you're showing unrealistic numbers, you need to show why. And if you ever receive unrealistic numbers, go back and ask, well, how did you get these numbers? How was this determined? IEC 61508 and 511 deal with the safety life cycle. They say that systematic and randomly, all these failures were considered and thought of. And the standards outline all of these steps that need to really take place to say that you have that higher safety reliability than just an average Joe. So if you're not doing those, if you're only cherry picking, or if you're using unrealistic data, you're compromising your certificate, you're compromising functional safety in your SIL. Let's take an example. Say you have a certificate for this example for a pneumatic actuator, and this is saying failing dangerously is 17.3 fits. If you're not familiar with fits, that's 10 times -9. That's per billion hours. That's a very, very, very small number. However, that seems, you've been out on the field, you can convert that quickly in your head, and this isn't going to fail for thousands of years. How is that possible? But there's things out there to help you. As I said, one of the things could be silsafedata.com. Silsafedata.com is, I call it my reality check. It lets you know kind of a lower bounds and an upper bounds where you should kind of fall in. So if you get a certificate for a valve, an actuator, a solenoid, you can look at, and it's pretty generic, it's going to say a Scotch yoke spring return actuator, not a manufacturer, make, and model, but this is going to let you know you should be falling in somewhere between 400 and 1200 fits. So this can let you know 417, that's a big difference. Maybe go back and ask. And when we did, we actually found this was done just per the manufacturer's return data. They didn't do any analysis. They just looked at how many they got in to how many were out. When this was compared, the same device did an FMEDA, it was found that in the environment and the application specified, the dangerous failure rate was actually 600 fits. You can see that's a huge difference, but that kind of fell in that range. Some of the devices, the range is very large in silsafedata.com. That's because there can be huge swings in complexities in some of these devices. So it might be better if you have specific information. However, if you don't, or if your information's too good to be true or unrealistic, you could always use the high bounds of SilSafe data kind of to give you an idea what you should be more looking at. I learn best from examples, so I wanted to quickly show you an example. If you're unfamiliar, this is our Excellentia tool. And I just put together a quick SIF, sensor, logic solver, solenoid, actuator, valve, 1 out of 1 system. And I put together my final elements using unrealistic numbers. And they were numbers that I actually saw from real life. And did the quick calculation and saw my PFD average. It came out to be, for the system, 1.2 times 10 to the -2 there. That's telling us that we achieve a SIL2, no redundancy, 1 out of 1, no diagnostics, no proof testing, nothing. And if you're designing a system, you might be through the roof right now. You could be jumping up and down, so excited. This is going to cut costs. This is going to save you time, money. As you can see from the failure rates on the bottom, All the final elements put together, we had 12.1 fits. The valve, the actuator, and the solenoid, and they would not fail. The mean time before failure to failure, would be over 9,000 years. As you can see, the most significant portion of our PFD average, the pie chart there, it's red. That's showing us that the sensors are the most unreliable part in our SIF, and our final elements only take up about 5% of our probability of failure. So if you are familiar with SIF design, you might question yourself right now a little bit. So I took the exact same SIF, put in more realistic numbers. We kept the sensors the same, the logic solver the same, just updated the realistic actuator, valve, and solenoid. And it went, as you can see, our pie chart went from basically all red to a lot blue. You can see our final elements are the main contributors to our PFD average, which is more realistic. And our failure rate for the three of them put together is more like 1,300 fits. And our mean time to failure is 87 years. At this point, unfortunately, we have our SIL went down to a SIL 1. At that, it's a low SIL 1. But don't freak out right now. You can improve your SIL, you can improve your reliability. Remember, we are 1 out of 1. Maybe we shouldn't be. Maybe we can add in diagnostics. We had none there. You can add in proof testing, powerful valve stroke testing. You can shorten your mission time. There's all sorts of variables that you can control to help this. However, you could see that just changing final elements to realistic numbers dropped you an entire, basically a SIL and a half level. So when you are thinking about optimistic failure rates, don't just think of them as unrealistic or optimistic. They need to be thought of as unsafe and simply dangerous. I said nowadays, especially in the United States, we live in the land of litigation. So you need to know, as an engineer and functional safety, what your responsibility is and what your legal responsibility is. There have been times where courts decide after accidents, whether that is civil or criminal, courts have decided. So if you're a design engineer, are you demonstrating you know what you're doing, you have expertise, you have judgment, you're using correct failure rates, you're not using too good to be true numbers and you don't know better. EPC, are there going to be training? OEMs, are you supplying the correct information out? The people, the asset owners, are you putting together a PSM program and acceptable? And are you actually implementing maintenance? Are you just letting your SIF sit there? And as I said, we've all heard of accidents. And we've all heard of accidents where there have been engineers held criminally responsible. And there are accidents, and more accidents, where they are civilly held responsible. And that's never a situation you want to find yourself in. So using your good failure rates and your good data and the safety standards hopefully will keep you out of that situation. Now I'm going to go ahead and take some questions. If you loved this and want more information, we have trainings in functional safety. We have them in all sorts of things: functional safety, alarm management, cybersecurity, burner management. They can be a short look into some, or maybe a half day, to a full week course. And we even are now offering online and self-paced training. So, as I said before, I wasn't very good at looking at questions, but now I will take some time to look at them. And if you think of questions later, feel free to email me and I'll try and get to them as quickly as I can. There we go. It's not pulling out. There. We had a question about 13849 and how it applies. 13849 is going to be one of those substandards. It's going to fall under that umbrella of IEC 61508. So if more the machinery aspect of it applies, you can get certification for 13849. And whatever is not covered in that standard, it says look back to IEC 61508 for reference. So once again, they kind of complement each other. If we don't have any other questions at this point, thank you so much for joining us, and check for more webinars, blogs, books, white papers, and come back again. Thanks.